Welcome to our review of the nervous system. We're going to talk about the neurons, synapses, neurotransmitters, the whole 9 yards. To start, let's look at the purpose of the nervous system, like we do all our body systems. You eat too much sugar, your body detects the increase in blood sugar, and it causes a release of insulin to get your blood sugar back to normal. The stimulus, the change, too much blood sugar, the reaction, insulin's released. You're going for a drive, you get into a car accident, big old fire, that could cause an explosion. You sense the danger, and that causes adrenaline to get released, giving you extra energy and triggering the fight or flight response. This allows you to get yourself and your loved ones to safety. You're cold because the sun went down, you're outside in just a light jacket. Happens to a lot of us. Your body senses the decrease in body temp and you start to shiver. The stimulus, the change, cold, you're cold. The response, shivering. You touch a pot, you forget that it's hot. Your body senses the heat, causing you to pull your hand away from the pot. The stimulus, the change, the hot pot. The response, pulling your hand away. You step on your little brother or little sister's toy, and it has a sharp edge. Your body immediately senses the sharp toy, and you lift your foot up away from the source of the pain. Stimulus, sharp toy. Response, lifting your leg up. You're running, and your body cells need to make more ATP and get rid of the CO2 waste. Your body recognizes this and you start to breathe faster. And your heart also beats faster to transport the nutrients and waste to and from the active cells. So what allows us to do literally everything? The brain, the spinal cord, and the network of nerves that go everywhere in your body. Those are the organs that make up the nervous system. And the purpose, as you saw with these stories, is to detect changes in the environment, which we call a stimulus, or stimuli, plural, and create a response to bring the body back to homeostasis, also called dynamic equilibrium. So in most part, it regulates the body and its systems. Let's take a look at the cells of the nervous system. What makes up this vital system of our body? First, another name for a nerve cell is called a neuron. And there's 3 types of neurons. There's interneurons, there's sensory neurons, and motor neurons. The 3 little arrows are definitions or functions of one of those particular neurons. The first arrow, neurons that detect a stimulus, a change, and using specialized receptors. These are sensory neurons. They have photoreceptors, pressure receptors, temperature receptors. Pretty cool to note, there's no wet receptors. Wet is just feeling a difference in the temperature and or pressure. Neurons that interpret a stimulus and generate a response. These are interneurons. They interpret, and they're between the sensory and the motor, always in the middle. And of course, the neurons that cause a muscle or gland to carry out a response, which will ultimately bring the body back to homeostasis, these are motor neurons. They stimulate a muscle or gland, and we're going to learn that those are called effectors. They allow us to respond. And the nervous system as a whole is broken down into 2 distinctive parts. The first, the central nervous system, the C.N.S. This is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. In the picture, it's this thing. The red long tube, that's the spinal cord, goes down your body, and at the top is the brain, with 3 main sections, many subsections. And the type of neurons or nerve cells that you'll find in the brain and spinal cord are only interneurons. That's it. Because these organs, they're just responsible for interpreting and generating a message. So here's the brain, here's your spinal cord. The second part of your nervous system are all those little blue nerves, all the nerves that radiate out from the central nervous system. They go everywhere in your body. these things. The type of neurons or nerve cells that make up the peripheral nervous system, the P.N.S., there's two main types. Sensory neurons, they'll detect as change, and motor neurons that connect to glands, connect to muscles, allowing you to do things, to move, react. But there are no interneurons. Last thing I checked, I don't have a little brain in my forearm. There's no little patches of interneurons or brains or anywhere in your body except for your brain and spinal cord. Looking more closely at the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, specifically the brain, and we'll look at the spinal cord too. The top part of the brain, this thing, this is called, well, before we get to what it's called, this controls your conscious thought. Things like reasoning, speech, interpreting, memory, logic, your thinking, pretty much what you're doing now. This is what makes us human. It allows us to reason, logic, communicate. You find this in dolphins, whales, other mammals or primates like chimpanzees. This gives us higher thinking skills. This is your cerebrum. The area at the back of your brain, this is the back of your head, this is called, again, before we do the name, let's do the functions. This helps you balance and coordinate, even as it comes to like writing something, coordinating your fingers, me talking right now, having to move your tongue, having to move your mouth, having to push air out a lot, push out air out a little. Speech is such a coordinated activity. Coordination, simply walking in a straight line, that's all controlled by this part of your brain called the cerebellum. Let's see if I can get it right this time. This part of your brain, this controls the involuntary actions, things you don't think about, things like your heartbeat, blinking, diaphragm moving, things that keep you alive. You find this actually in a lot of organisms because this is like the bare minimum you need to live. This is like the central, most important part of the brain. It keeps you alive. So critical that there's like little masses or a surgery needs to be done close to the brainstem. Generally speaking, it only is done if it's life or death. It's such a vulnerable, important area. This is the medulla. Finally, the medulla, you can see this picture clearly, it just gets skinny and it goes down your back. Your medulla, when it gets skinny and goes down your back, it just changes its name to the spinal cord, which is also in charge of involuntary actions, specifically your reflexes. This is your brain, which is very soft. If you're in my class, as you saw, it's very squishy. Literally, you could hold it and it will start to crush itself under its own weight. And it actually has a fluid around the brain that helps keep it protected. The peripheral nervous system. A little more to this one. All the nerves that radiate out from the central. It's broken down into two groups. It's broken down further. You have the nerves called somatic peripheral nerves. These nerves control things that you do think about. Conscious thought, voluntary actions. Like if you kick a ball, you move your eyes, you do a push-up, that's things you think about. Like I'm pushing myself up, I'm moving my eyes to the right. That's something you think about. The second is the autonomic. These things automatically happen. These are autonomic peripheral nerves. They attach to things like your heart, diaphragm. They control unconscious, involuntary actions. Things you don't think about doing. Imagine if you had to think about your heart beating, your diaphragm contracting, blinking your eyes every single time. You're telling your pancreas, all right, we have too much sugar, we got to release insulin. Thank heavens for the autonomic peripheral nervous system, because we don't want to have to think about doing all that. We got enough on our plates as it is. And the autonomic peripheral nervous system is divided further into two categories. The sympathetic peripheral nerves. The S in sympathetic stands for stress. This is the part of peripheral nervous system that brings the body into a stress state, the fight or flight state. And of course, you don't stay in that state forever. So the parasympathetic peripheral nerves, the P stands for peace, brings your body back to a peaceful state. This is the peripheral nervous system and the breakdown of your nerves. So how do these different nerves and nerve cells work together? Let's take a look at a reflex arc. Of course, this is going to involve your spinal cord, so reflexes. And we have to start with a stimulus, a change. Let's say this is a nerve in your finger, and you put it next to a fire. That's going to be sensed by you 100%. It's going to be sensed by these little things right here. These are highly specialized receptors. They detect stimuli of all sorts, pressure, heat, a whole host, photoreceptors in your eyes. And once they detect a change, let's actually make mention of these guys. The receptors are on these specific type of nerve cells. Sensory receptors are on sensory nerves. And when the sensory nerves use the receptors to detect a stimulus, a change, an impulse is generated. This thing. This impulse will move along the nerve cells. Impulse is simply just a message. And more specifically, the impulse is not a bolt of lightning that goes through a nerve. The impulse is a quick change in the sodium and potassium concentrations in a nerve cell. The sodium and potassium are important for nerves to generate or to allow impulses to move through. So the stimulus is sensed by receptors on sensory nerves. The impulse travels through your sensory nerves all the way to these specialized nerve cells located in your central nervous system, your spinal cord specifically. These will interpret the impulse from the sensory neurons and generate a response, and that response is going to be sent out into these nerves, or this nerve called a motor nerve, which is going to attach to a muscle or gland, causing a reaction to happen and getting the body back to homeostasis. And this right here, a muscle or a gland, in this case a muscle, is going to be used to move your finger away from the fire and get back to homeostasis. Muscles or glands will be referred to as effectors because they cause an effect. Did I see that right? The nerve cells not touch? Nope. Or yep, depends on how you read the question. The neurons don't touch. So how does the impulse get from one nerve cell to the next if they don't touch? Riddle me that. Let's take a look. We got to dive into this. This is crazy. So there's a huge gap here. The impulse comes and it's like there's a huge gap. What am I going to do? Well, first off, let's give a name to the gap. It's called the synapse. Right here. The synapse is the gap between nerve cells. It's an intercellular space. Intercellular space. Special proteins. As soon as the impulse gets to the end of one nerve cell, the one on the left, specialized proteins will be released into the synapse. These proteins will be called neurotransmitters. They will relay or transmit a very specific message from one nerve cell to the next. But what do the neurotransmitters do? Do they just dance around? They do something. They have to attach to the matching or complementary shape receptor on the next neuron. So you can't say the word same, by the way. It has to be matching or complementary. Here we go. So these neurotransmitters, what will they connect to? Which receptors are they going to connect to? There's A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'll give you a hint. there's two. They're going to attach to A because they have a matching or complementary shape, and they're going to attach to C. Same reason, matching or complementary shape. And as soon as they attach, the impulse continues. And it will go to nerve after nerve after nerve. So it goes to your interneurons and eventually your motor neurons and a muscle or gland. Hooray. All right, so after they do their job, after they connect to a receptor and transmit the message, what happens to the neurotransmitters? Well, one, an enzyme could break them down. They go to the enzyme, bam, they're gone. Go to the enzyme, boom, broken down. There's another thing that could happen. Let's say you have some valuable serotonin or dopamine, things that are really tough to make in the body. You're not going to break it down. Those are valuable things. Option 2, they could be reabsorbed using a carrier protein. So this reuptake or carrier protein will allow these neurotransmitters to get reabsorbed using ATP, of course, as all carrier proteins do. And they'll be saved for next time. Can an impulse, like a pain impulse, be stopped from being transmitted? Yeah. There's pain medicine out there. How's it done? Well, you could introduce these things, these little red hats they look like. This is a specific drug. And this drug, it looks like it attaches to the receptors. Can those neurotransmitters get into the receptor to keep the impulse going? Not a chance. Boom. Boom. Bounce right off. The impulse will not continue to the next nerve because the neurotransmitters can attach to the corresponding shape receptors. Second thing you could do, you could attach a drug to the neurotransmitters. That will cause the neurotransmitters to have a weird shape. And let's blow that up. Can that neurotransmitter fit into the original receptor? Nope. Can't do it. So 2, you could have a drug that attaches to the neurotransmitter. This will give the neurotransmitter a shape that will no longer match the receptor shape. Therefore, the impulse will not be transmitted. All right. Another scenario, I know. Can you keep an impulse constantly traveling from one neuron to the next? Yeah, you can. You don't want this to be a pain impulse, by the way, because if you constantly have pain, that's not a good thing. See, there's something's wrong, or you took a medicine that actually caused this pain to constantly be transmitted. So how could you do this? How could you constantly get an impulse across? Well, if you block the enzyme from breaking the neurotransmitters down, the neurotransmitters can't be broken down, and they're going to stay in the synapse. Here, let's block the enzyme. Neurotransmitter can't go, and it goes right into the receptor, constantly transmitting an impulse. And in this case, the impulse, these are triangles. I took away the key. I'm not sure why I did that. But these are happy impulses. We're not going to be domineering and be like, these have to be pain impulses. All right, so how are we going to keep the happy impulse? There's another way you could do it. A lot of these happy or good-feeling neurotransmitters get reabsorbed. So you could do another medicine that blocks the protein that reabsorbs, blocks that carrier protein. Neurotransmitters can't go in. They constantly go back into the receptor, constantly transmitting that good feeling. This is what some drugs do. And eventually your body will make specialized enzymes to break these things down. And once that drug wears off, and once the neurotransmitters are broken down, You'll be followed by a period of, depending on whatever it is, a long period, short period of feeling very down. And finally, let's take a look at what a neuron actually looks like. This is a nerve cell, this great big thing right here. And a nerve cell has two ends to it. It has this big old fat end over here, and it has the long neck and this end over here. The great big fat end would be called the dendrite. And this is where impulses will come. Impulses will come down the dendrite, and they're going to move through the axon and eventually out the axon, the terminal ends of the axon. This is the axon side. The A in axon stands for away. So the axon side is where impulses ultimately leave a neuron. And we know the synapse between the nerve cells, this little gap right here. And we also, if you notice, this fatty membrane right here, this like shield around the axon, it's like the axon's a long wire, and it has these cells around them called Schwann cells. You could tell that's like a little nucleus right there. These cells, let's say this is a cross-section of the nucleus, or of the axon. These things, let me just grab another color real quick. They have a cell called the Schwann cell. It wraps around and wraps around, so it's growing around and making a really thick layer of membrane after membrane after membrane. And here's the nucleus. This right here, that layer and layer of Schwann cell, is called the myelin. The myelin, specifically the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is very important. Schwann cell or myelin. The reason why it's so important is it keeps the impulses going in one direction. And there's little spaces right there. These little spaces between the myelin are referred to as the nodes of Ranvier. And that's very important to have insulation like the myelin sheath, kind of like rubber around a wire. It keeps messages going in one direction. But the impulse is going to jump from one gap, one node of Ranvier, to the next. So the myelin causes the impulse to jump from one little node to the next. That increases the speed dramatically. So the myelin sheath not only keeps impulses going in one direction, it also allows the impulses to be speedy. So if you lose the myelin sheath, it's going to cause impulses or messages to be sent very slowly. And if messages are sent slowly or not sent at all, it could cause paralysis or loss of function. And as you're losing the myelin, nerve signals will get scattered all around, and that's going to cause twitching in your outer limbs. These are some symptoms of MS, or multiple sclerosis, where you have exposed fiber, exposed axon, due to the demyelination or myelin leaving the nerve cell. Very, very tough disease to deal with, but there is good medication out there that could slow this down and keep you living a happy, healthy life. And that is the end of our nervous system journey.